One could scarcely conceive of a more meticulously curated realm than the gated oaks at Peaceful Pines, a suburban enclave wherein the very blades of grass stood in rigid, uniform deference to a higher power. This power was not divine, but rather terrestrial and far more terrifying. The Homeowners Association. It was an entity of suffocating pedantry, a bureaucratic leviathan that dictated the precise shade of beige for one's shutters, the maximum permissible height of a decorative shrub, and the exact window of time during which holiday cheer, in the form of tasteful, non-blinking white lights, might be displayed. Here, conformity was not merely encouraged. It was a sacred, non-negotiable covenant, enforced with the solemnity of a high court and the fervor of a zealot. To reside within the gated oaks was to surrender one's aesthetic soul in exchange for the promise of unassailable property values and a life devoid of unsightly surprises. Yet, into this sterile paradise, a pestilence began to creep, a slow, insidious plague of a most peculiar nature. It was a malady that manifested as a zombie-like affliction, a languid, shuffling decay of the flesh and spirit. Curiously, this affliction was not indiscriminately virulent. Nay, its targets were selected with the same baffling specificity as an HOA violation notice. It befell only those unfortunate residents who had, in the recent past, been formally cited and fined for some trivial transgression against the community's sacred bylaws. It was as though the very ink on the violation slip carried a dormant, necrotic curse, awakened by the sting of a $30 penalty for a slightly tilted mailbox or a weed daring to sprout from a pristine flowerbed. The community was, in essence, being undone by its own obsessive-compulsive regulations. Brenda, a working mother whose existence was a perpetual triathlon of stress, exhaustion, and lukewarm coffee, now found herself navigating this bizarre apocalypse. Her husband, Gary, a man of simple pleasures, had become the latest victim of the HOA's pathogenic wrath. His crime, the possession of a ceramic bird bath with a hairline fracture, a grievous offense worthy of a fine and, as it turned out, a slow descent into Brenda's days devolved into a frantic ballet of deception, desperately concealing her groaning, shambling spouse in the den while simultaneously preparing for a mandatory emergency HOA meeting. The official agenda, circulated with chilling efficiency by the board, was to address the recent unsightly messes dotting the common areas and the alarming proliferation of unapproved vegetative growth euphemisms, it seemed, for the first few ravaged bodies and their newly infected forms. The mandatory meeting, held in the community's impeccably beige clubhouse, descended into a maelstrom of guttural moans and bureaucratic fury. The infected, it transpired, were not driven by a mindless hunger for brains alone. Their suburban anxieties, deeply ingrained by years of HOA conditioning, persisted beyond the grave. They shambled, not with primal rage, but with a palpable sense of grievance, their groans sounding less like a cry for flesh and more like a furious, incoherent demand for bylaw enforcement. They pointed decaying fingers at non-regulation fences and clawed at neighbors over unapproved lawn ornaments. Amidst the chaos, Brenda, armed with a lifetime of appeasing petty tyrants, found her salvation in the very document that had damned her husband. She recalled, with the clarity of a battle-hardened veteran, Chapter 4, Section B, Subclause 12, Acceptable Use of Weaponry in Defense of Structural Integrity. Wielding a recently purchased HOA-compliant fire poker, she began to defend her homes and her life's structural integrity from her undead, rule-obsessed neighbors. Yet, the true horror of the gated oaks at Peaceful Pines wore not the pallor of death, but the crisp, sensible pantsuit of Marcia. The unyielding and power-hungry HOA president. As the clubhouse devolved into a scene of Baroque carnage, Marcia remained a bastion of infuriating composure, her gaze fixed not on the reanimated corpses but on the clear violations of community standards. The escalating violence was, to her, merely a catastrophic failure to maintain property value. The desperate, fiery defense mounted by the survivors was a flagrant breach of the no open flames on common property rule. As a horde of her former constituents, now groaning agents of chaos, finally breached her personal space and began to drag her into their ranks. Her final, piercing shriek was not of terror, but of pure, unadulterated indignation, of final, furious condemnation of Brenda's mailbox, which was, upon closer inspection, painted a shade of eggshell that was at least 2 degrees off the approved swatch.